At Mère Marché, slow living is at the heart of our brand philosophy. Our products and offerings are designed to create moments of pause, allowing individuals to connect with themselves and their surroundings, fostering a sense of harmony and well-being. Our prayer is that by honoring people and the planet through our brand efforts, we will inspire others to embrace whole beauty and commune with nature. We invite all of our listeners to enjoy 15% off Mère Marché's entire product line with code MèreMarché at MèreMarché.com. Hello and welcome to the Mère Marché podcast. I'm your host, Christie Wright, and today's guest is a dear friend of mine, Abby Breece, of nearly 25 years. I consider her a sister. We've been through life's highest of highs and lowest of lows together. And I've had the honor and privilege of having a front row seat in her life. Abby is someone that has been through tremendous loss in her life and today is willing to open up about that with us and share with all of you her story and also how she has healed through her loss. She has some wonderful insight and wisdom on this topic. And Abby, I'm so grateful to you for allowing me to hold this space for you. So thank you.
Thank you. It's very felt. And I'm just glad to be here and excited to share and just grateful. So thank you and echo all that back to you.
Oh. Well, before we get into the depths of all of it, can you share with everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I'm a mother. I have a couple businesses, one being my biggest passion, which is mental health care. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Indianapolis in private practice. So I work mainly with women individually, but also work with couples and families. But I'm very passionate about quality and equitable mental health care. And then I also have a small vintage line of custom curation of small home goods as well as furniture that I do on my own and then also sell out of a great shop, Lux and Ivy, which is in Indianapolis as well. So dabble a little bit here and there, but they're both, I need both of them in my world, I've learned.
Yeah, it's like the yin and yang of just the lightness of the Beaulah vintage. And you have such an eye for it too. I mean, we're definitely going to share her Instagram with you so you guys can connect with her because you can sometimes shop via like online and have it shipped. Or also if you're local, you can go see her stuff at Lux and Ivy. So
yeah, vintage is always something that you and I have connected on and done together and shared. And there's a lot of story in that and the items that we find. So it's special.
It is very special. Okay, so I'm just going to open this up to you now to share your story with us and just whatever you feel called to share.
Yeah, thank you. I think I wanted to first just start by saying when we talk about the word loss, a lot of times we automatically think about the death of a physical person. And while that's most of my experience and that's most of what like I'll be centering on today, I think it's important to just note that loss takes the shape of a lot of different forms. And so it could be the loss of a childhood that for different reasons of abuse or trauma. It could be a job. It could be moving and having to create a whole new life and meet all new friends. It could look like an actual pet you lost. So loss can look like a lot of things. And I think it's important to treat it as such, like as the nuance that it is, that loss is loss and it can all hurt. And and I'm sure that from a collective perspective, a lot of people, while maybe you don't have physical death in your life all the time, nearly everyone is touched by some type of loss in the ambiguous sense or in the psychological sense, things like that. So for me, how that has taken shape has been a couple really key people in my world who I lost. And that was really starting when I've known you since I was 10, which is wild. And so junior year in high school, when I was 17, we lost my dad unexpectedly in the middle of the night due to heart failure. And, that was one of those really pivotal at being a very in your developmental years as a 17-year-old, just a massive loss on all fronts, and the unexpected nature of it as well. And so there was obviously that was a very sudden and unexpected loss. There, as I grew up, there were, losses here and there with more psychological or ambiguous. But later in my world too, I lost my brother, as you know, Adam, I was very close with. And that was unexpected as well. And that was also sudden. And so, and that was also died by suicide. And so we'll talk probably a little bit more about kind of the context of loss. And I can share some a little bit later about the different types of losses and how that has impact on the specific loss and how you deal with it, of how a person died or if it was an illness, a tragedy or trauma involved. So that was very pivotal as well. And then lastly, a big market loss was a more recent one of our first daughter, Sloan. And that was 2 years ago, going through the fertility process and having a miscarriage close to 15 weeks. And so that one being more ambiguous, with not actually having met her and shared life with her. Those types of losses can be really difficult with just not having your more, I guess, expected way or classic way of experiencing life with someone and then losing them, because you kind of get robbed of a potential what you could have had. So all of these are specific and unique, but those are the ones that have happened for me kind of throughout the last 20 years.
Yeah. Big ones.
Yeah.
Big ones. And
big ones.
At such pivotal moments in your life, going back to being a junior in high school and losing your father, and then fast forwarding, how many years would have been in between your dad and Adam?
2004 to 29, so 15 years.
15 years. Yeah. And I mean, in those 15 years, it's like you grew up in those 15 years, and your brother was a huge part of your life, and just being that male figure for you.
For sure.
After losing your dad, and then losing him suddenly, at how old were you? 20.
I think I was just 30, 31.
31?
31.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before starting a family. But I guess through all of those, through the youth that you were when your dad passed, now your adulthood, and going through those losses, is it something where as you grew and had these big life changes, you have to kind of go through the grieving process in those life changes? Would you say that your healing was a linear process, or would you say it comes and goes in waves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's definitely a misconception by myself and lots of people that it almost should look like this more linear process, when I kind of use more so the imagery of like a tangled ball of yarn. A lot of people have heard of kind of the quintessential 5 stages of grief. And while those are very true and very often like people's experiences of what they actually experience, we cycle through in and out all kinds of phases, or we spend more time in one than another. We repeat a cycle. we stay in a cycle for a couple years, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no, your grief journey, my grief journey is going to look completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And so definitely not linear, really more erratic. And I would say too, from the loss from more of my youth to loss in adulthood, similar themes are going to come up because, I believe that who I am at 17, is also in part who I am at 36 now today. But clearly there's been a lot of growth and development in between there. And so similar themes, certainly, but different, lived experience in between then. And so it looks very different, or me understanding myself and how to make space for my emotions and things like that is going to look very different 20 years later.
Yeah. What role would you say like time plays in the process of healing?
Yeah. That's a good one. I think, I think a big piece of that is, well, firstly, I would say there's kind of that old phrase of like time heals all wounds, and it really doesn't. I think time makes the wounds more tolerable. And so, yeah, time, from what I mentioned at a developmental level, the more you know yourself, the more in touch with yourself you are, the better that you're going to get through a process of loss and bereavement and grief or ambiguous loss. And the opposite would be true of, I think, the harder it is when you haven't had to kind of face yourself going through those types of things. And so time, plays a big piece in loss, and as well as, time from the perspective of, I won't go into it too much, but how long you grieve, how long you feel that loss, it's going to be felt your whole life, but how intense it is for you also depends on the context in which the loss took place. So was there trauma involved? Was there a long-term illness? Was it the loss ambiguous? Such as, say, having an alcoholic parent. So being estranged and that person is physically still living, but psychologically, there's not that connection. Ambiguous loss can also be miscarriage or stillbirth of, there is a physical loss, but you didn't have that actual connection, that lived life with them. So that can definitely impact the time in which it takes to grieve. And there's not a time you should shoot for of when you should be done. You're really never fully done. You're just probably more wholehearted along the way than you were before.
What coping mechanisms would you say that you found to be helpful with your grieving process?
Yeah. I like referencing, this isn't a plug, but the TV series Shrinking that came out.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. Ethically questionable for therapists, sure. But a wonderful show. A wonderful
So
show
good.
about, honestly, just the realities of grief and loss.
Yeah.
And how if you want to experience a show that's actually very, I think, grounded and rooted in what loss feels like in different perspectives of parents, children, at different phases of life. I'm getting to this coping skill, which is in the movie. There's some therapists, and they mention to, like, once a day, put on a song that just resonates with you and kind of brings out all the feels.
Yes.
And to just kind of take some time just for that little moment in time to feel your feelings, allow your feelings, get in touch with the grief. So that what that looks like for me is, it may not be a song that I put on, but it would be, set a timer for 3 to 5 minutes, just a small time at first, and allow any feeling that comes up and to feel it and acknowledge it. Not to understand it or judge it, but just kind of allow the space, like let it breathe. And then when the timer goes off, of almost like literally or figuratively from like a ritual perspective, trying to kind of put that box back up on the shelf and accessing it tomorrow or the next day.
Mm-hmm.
We can't grieve 24 hours a day. It's just too much, but we're going to keep grieving, and to kind of get ahead of it or just be more proactive, I suppose, and honoring of our grief, we can make it kind of this daily practice of looking at it in the face for what it is.
Yeah.
And trying to kind of open ourselves up to it in a way that is manageable and controlled as much as we can.
Yeah. I think that's the taking time to just tune everything out and grieve is it's a hard thing for me to do, but I'm sure it's hard for a lot of people.
Sure.
To really just sit and face your grief.
Yeah.
So, I think you're someone that's beautifully comfortable with sitting and facing people. There are people that welcome the negative feelings, and then there are people that suppress the negative feelings. And I more sit in the camp of suppressing negative feelings, whereas I feel like something I've always admired about you is not that you welcome any of these like horrible things, but you welcome the feeling and you allow the feeling to be. So I guess, do you have any tips for those who want to suppress the feelings on how they can just start to like ease into that space of like super uncomfortable?
Yeah,
for some
absolutely.
people.
That's a great one. And there, I will say there's wonderful things about those who don't readily access those as easily, because there's a lot of hope to be had that folks like myself who sometimes linger a bit longer or have a bit of that jaded and kind of cynical outlook sometimes can just kind of get a little knocked down, can stay in that space too long. So it's like we need your type.
No.
Um,
Well, we need your type. So it's
it's a good balance.
Yeah, it is.
So I say a couple of things like having good boundaries around your grief, knowing that we can't fully, again, control or contain it. But knowing the people in your life, your support system, um, who might need to come around you and support you or even challenge you, especially if you're one that tends to suppress some of those emotions, of having friends check in with you, of not just, hey, how are you doing? But hey, ask me questions that will help me. Like how's grief shown up for you lately? What's your world looked like? What have you been feeling lately? What color do you feel today? Anything that can just help break you open a little bit into those pieces. So knowing your people that you do feel safe with and can say, hey, like, I want you to walk alongside me in this and ask me these questions. I think that's a big part of it. There's also, I kind of made mention to ritual earlier of this idea of having a fixed amount of time where you try to access those emotions and then put it away. But rituals, as you've talked a lot about on this podcast for a lot of things in life, are very powerful because they mark consistency and they mark meaning and significance. And so with grief, it's an honoring, it's a time of remembrance. And there's comfort in ritual, there's comfort in habit. So a way of accessing your most honest and vulnerable emotions might be doing a ritual. So for instance, my brother who has passed, a colleague of mine and staff got me a large fiddle leaf fig tree. And for me, there's that ritual of tending to it, of watering it, fertilizing it, pruning it. keeping it alive. Sometimes
Mm.
I talk to it, not as though it's him, my brother, but it's just this living, breathing thing
Mm-hmm.
that takes up space in our home, and I've named it Uncle A. As Uncle Adam. I don't know. And it's so it could be that. It could be for Adam, again, I kept a lot of his very basic, generic, like kitchen utensils, like a cheese grater, a bottle opener,
Mm.
an ice cream maker. And so those things themselves they're not, um, unique or special items. But I love to be able to be doing life in my house, knowing that I'm shredding cheese with his cheese grater,
Yeah.
or I'm opening, a new bottle of something
Yeah.
with his wine opener. And so it's just those day in, day out pieces of I get to kind of reconnect in that
Yeah.
way. Like that's ritual. That is the process of choosing to remember and choosing to enter into those hard emotions and raise those when it is frankly really hard to feel that.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Like just a good way to tune into the remembrance of him daily. And um, I've witnessed that, from me or watching you do those things, and just found it to be very sweet. And I think that you're really good with still keeping those loved ones a part of your life. And do you have any others that you'd like to share? Any other rituals or
That's
ways you
good.
remember?
I would say, let's see. I think making a loved one's favorite food can be really
Mm.
therapeutic. Food has such a significance in culture and in remembrance of someone. And so going to a certain place they might have loved, or my brother was really passionate about making beer, brewing beer. And so we've tried that sometimes. And in the process, we're telling stories, we're talking about him. You can't not be therapeutic to yourself and others when you're practicing some type of ritual or of remembrance.
Mm.
Um, Using coffee cups. My favorite sweatshirt is that of my brother's.
Mm.
Um, so things like that of just daily living. We have his washing machine and dryer, strangely enough. So when I do the mundane, everyday tasks of laundry, um, I remember him, and it gives me comfort to still use his things and know that all those things do have a shelf life and that one day it will stop working. And
Mm.
I have to reckon, like come to grips with that too.
Mm.
And that I've not always cared well for his plant and it will lose some leaves. And so, those
Oh.
things can kind of be hard, and we can really, really,
Mm.
really just personalize them. And so it's also a not holding too tightly and knowing that, what, I'm allowed to walk through life differently now. Like I have to.
Mhm.
And sometimes that may not always mean, remembering to fertilize this
Mhm.
4-foot tree.
Maybe it's just something in the season
Yeah, absolutely.
that you need
Absolutely.
tangible.
Yes. Tangible. That's a good, yes. Having something tangible, I think that's a big part of ritual too.
Yeah.
Not always, but a
Mm.
marking of something that is tangible, just like that person who's no longer here
Mhm.
was a tangible presence
Mm.
in our life.
I love that. I love all those little things that you do and think about throughout your day. Um, you had mentioned support earlier, and I want to touch on that too. Like, how have you found support systems being helpful to you through all of these different
Yeah.
moments in your life, different ages, but especially now with Adam, and then also losing Sloan?
Mhm.
And I guess what has been the most helpful thing for you?
Yeah. Mm. I certainly don't think I could do get through half of what I did without support. I know that very well and firsthand with you specifically and others in my life. I think knowing your friends, and specifically the friend who is great at helping you get out of the house, the friend you need to call when you have a logistical issue that you need some help with, a task, shelves to assemble. Grief does a lot of things, but one of the biggest things is that it slows you down. It's such an attack on your nervous system from so many levels, and it literally makes decision making and fatigue, like mental and physical fatigues, so much more elevated. And so your support system, knowing your friends and how they can show up for you is a really big piece of it. So something I often will say is that when we're supporting someone who's gone through some type of loss, it can feel really overwhelming to know how to support them, right? We can't fix it. We can't make it hurt any less. So, like, what can we actually do? And a lot of times it's just showing up and being present. And like that is an offering. And other times it might be more tangible. So we often kind of get stuck in this space of saying, hey, if you need anything, let me know. Or if I can do anything to help, just tell me. And it's hard because that person, while such like a wonderful gift, is already so overwhelmed by life, doesn't know what they need, or maybe can't even think about speaking that into existence. So a better gift to give is by offering like 3 options and saying, hey, would you like to go for a walk and grab some coffee and talk about it? Do you want me to sit here in silence? Or do you want some time by yourself right now? Giving them options, but then giving them the autonomy to choose. You're just narrowing down the options for them, which people going through loss need. They have that decision fatigue. They need fewer choices.
Yeah. I can definitely see that for sure.
Something that Brene Brown mentioned probably a decade ago is this idea of creating and adopting these pieces of empathy looks more like saying, that must be so hard. I'm so glad you told me. Versus sympathy, which looks more like someone saying, at least you're able to get pregnant. I know you lost a child, but at least you can get pregnant. Or I know your son flunked out of school, but your oldest daughter is an awesome student. Like, she's straight A's. Like, at least your other kid that has done pretty well. And
like, lose the silver lining.
yeah, exactly. We actually don't need to fix it. And when we try to fix it, it ends up dismissing and invalidating someone's pain. And it actually, I think, shows more about our own discomforts and trying to support someone by trying to make it better and trying to make it go away, while so well intentioned and even loving, it can actually end up doing the opposite and making them feel worse about what they already do, or making them feel guilty for feeling a certain way. So just showing up and saying, hey, I'm really glad you told me. Thank you. Or tell me more. Like, how validating is that? But how scary also is putting ourselves in that position to have someone open up to us in that way. So that's the call. That's the invitation of showing up bravely in that space as a support.
Yeah. And I think too, looking back on times where I've, experienced loss or going through something really hard, and just having a friend, or like, especially you, like just showing up and sitting in the same room. Sometimes just the presence of another person. You show up and the silence is just as profound as any word, anything you can do.
Yes.
And for me, that was always just what I needed, is I just needed the presence of someone else, or the touch of someone else, or that was huge for me in that moment, not feeling lonely, and
yeah. There's I mean, you brought up touch, and I didn't really think about that. Of there's so many ways to like be present with someone, and like words are one way, but there's so many others, and I think touch is another huge piece of, like you said, helping us feel less lonely. There's a little quote by a friend of mine that Gretchen with Mama Ochre, and she talked about, if you feel lonely, I could be lonely with you. And I think that's probably one of the best like embodiment of empathy.
Yeah.
Of I'll
beautiful.
join you in what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Because that's really where it counts, and that's where we're doing life together, is being willing to enter into those hard spaces, which you've always done with me. And like, what an offering.
Yeah. And sometimes the hard space is not going in as a friend trying to pull you out of it.
Yes.
But just, all right, we're in the depths.
Yes.
We're like in the dark
Yes.
space, and we're just going to be here for as long as it takes.
Yeah. There's definitely this, culturally speaking too, this discomfort, I think, more in our westernized culture of, I think a lot of us don't know how to mourn well, don't take time to do it. And so there's this desire to just get out as quick as you can.
Yeah.
And I get that on a lot of days. And then there's a lot of days where it's like, we don't want to be rushed through our grief. That feels like such an affront. And we need people to, something you've always been good at is, and I encourage people to do this, is the person that's been lost, of saying their name, of not just saying, hey, how are you doing lately with the loss of your loved one, but saying, hey, like, I was thinking about you and Sloan today. How are you doing with that? I think just speaking their name, bringing it back into existence where their name comes out of your mouth more, because you miss them so much already. It humanizes the loss. It brings it back into, you're kind of bringing that person back in a way of just saying, like, gosh, when a person dies, you don't hear their name as much anymore. You don't hear that person's voice. So if someone can like be so brave to say, hey, I was thinking about you and your dad, Terry, or your brother, Adam. Tell me how you are.
Yeah.
What's that been like for you lately? Just be curious.
I love that. And I also feel that that is something you do well. And even your mom, she does that very well, of just constantly just in a moment, if that person comes to mind saying it, oh, this reminded me of something Adam I did with Adam, or this reminded me of Terry. It's not taboo to bring them up in a happy moment.
Right.
And I think that's so beautiful to witness on the other side, is like, oh, like they're joyful, and yet they're still speaking of this person that they've lost in such a happy way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, to your point earlier of when you can kind of get like brain fog from like not remembering so many things about the time of that loss. The same is true as in, you're collecting all these perspectives on like loss is such a collective thing. And so, yes, I lost my dad, but you lost someone as well. And other people, like my dad was different people, was a different person to different people. And so, I think that's again, like the beauty and the terror we hold of grief and loss is hearing these different perspectives of, or different stories of these people that we've lost, and getting to see who this person was to all these people is beautiful, because you can't quite capture someone's life just from your own perspective. And so you really gain this, I don't want to make it sound so like amazing and joyful, but truly, if they're not even from a silver lining perspective, but from just a place of wholehearted living and of healing and of continuing on with life, that's something to be gained, is is hearing the way in which someone you love who's now gone before you has loved and seen other people and showed up in their lives, and getting to hear those examples. That's a huge treasure.
Yeah, that reminds me of the last time we were together, and we were just kind of going down the memories, and it felt so healing to just go through the hard memories of those days, but also go through, like, remember when Adam did this to us in the middle of the night? Like, or remember, when your dad was teaching you how to drive, like, just funny things that they, still hold so much space for,
Totally.
And that to me is such a sign of growth and healing, and being able to there's a time where it's not possible to do that. And then there's a time where this new space opens where it's like, oh,
Absolutely.
we can laugh and remember this person, and just like, bring up something funny real quick. And it's not, that might be a time thing too. Like, all of a sudden it's, oh, this isn't as painful as it was.
Yes.
Or as a friend, like, I didn't hesitate like I might have before,
Yeah.
It's
It's
a good, beautiful space to be in too.
Yes. Yeah. When you don't so much just talk about the losing piece, but I don't know if I would say the gaining, but more so of focusing on the entirety of a person's life versus when you just lost them. And sometimes that's all that's in focus at first. But when some of that trauma dust settles a bit, you're able and freed up to kind of think about all the pieces of who that person was to different people. And that's, like you said, growth and development. And I think part of time and how time works in grief.
Yeah. Trauma dust. I like that. Is this a common term in your...
No, actually, that was...
that was good.
That was just spontaneous.
I was like, wow,
all of a sudden.
That is a good way to put it.
TM.
TM. Speaking of growth and like growing through the healing process, I guess from a personal perspective, how do you feel like you've grown? Through these different losses?
It's a great one. I'm still figuring that out. Definitely. I'm still learning. I think that it certainly develops your capacity for empathy. It makes you give other people the benefit of the doubt. Of like, everyone's walking through something. I think some of the strongest and most wholehearted people that I know are the ones who've experienced the most loss. And, I don't look at it as like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type thing, but more so, I think, like this is the hand I've been dealt. This is what I'm walking through. And, it's not just that I think what I'm going through now can help someone else, because sure, possibly, but, I think loss has helped me to be a lot more present. So there's a tendency for us as a people, and me especially, to spend time in the past or spend time in the future when we experience loss. But loss also brings us like abruptly to the present. And so I think from a really helpful perspective, it's perspective taking. I think loss helps you it kind of gives you this new outlook and magnifying glass as to what's important and what you might need to kind of pare back on. It puts other things into like a new focus. So, I think especially through miscarriage and going through fertility treatments and, showing up at the fertility doctor and seeing the same people in the office every week. There's that weird sense of, I don't know any of these people and their story, but I do know one big thing about them. And they know one big thing about me because we're all here for that same reason. And there's that strange sense of connectedness or knownness or feeling seen.
Yeah.
When you're going through something. And so that capacity, I think, for other people and that margin you hold of everyone is going through something we all don't know. And so just trying to hold space for that, as you've said, you're holding space for me today, I think is invaluable of just our humanity for how we see other people is holding that margin and capacity for there's a lot of suffering in the world and it looks very different for everyone. And so can we hold that for ourselves? Can we hold that for others?
I also want to touch on grieving with partners because that is something you have, you have a wonderful partner in Eric, your husband, but yeah, you both have had to grieve through a lot together.
Mhm.
And sometimes you see couples that don't make it out of that deep grief together.
Yeah.
What do you think why do you think you guys made it through so much grief and loss and healing together through it? But what are some key tips you could give others who might be experiencing infertility, might have just gone through a loss of someone else's parent or a friend or something, but you're grieving together? Yeah. Because of course everyone has their own perspectives and how they grieve.
Man, that's rich. Yeah, I think it's important to say that like Eric and I don't have anything special that made us able to do it, but I think more so we all have the ability to hold space, as we were saying earlier, but also to allow ourselves and the other to evolve. And so something I noticed that through various losses and traumas for being married to Eric for maybe 10 years this year, is that there's this profound closeness with the person you do life with when you experience that type of loss and trauma together.
Mm-hmm.
And so your world gets smaller and it's kind of like sometimes can feel like the two of you against the world. And there's this deep closeness and vulnerability in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then as time, as time goes on, because you're different people, your grief process is going to start to look different. So, for Eric and I, we learned really quickly that I'm a verbal processor. I need to get out words, and that's how I think and make sense of things. And for him, he's much more of an internal processor. And so I think assuming the best of our partner in grief is one of the biggest gifts we can give to them and to ourselves, because I think we tend to hyperfixate or hyper personalize certain things in loss and grief, which of course we just went through a major loss. And so every facet of ourselves is going to feel tender.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for Eric and I, we quickly realized that to be on the lookout for agitation for yourself and in between each other of everything at the drop of a hat would make us agitated. I could run out of toothpaste and feel livid all of a sudden. So your fuse is just so much shorter with everything. Your candle wick is small. And so knowing that for yourself and each other is helpful. Allowing extra margin for how you do things differently in the face of loss will be really helpful. And then for us, kind of having almost like an end of, it might be at the end of every day, it might be at the end of every couple days, but a quick check-in. How are you doing? What do we need to tend to? What do we want to keep doing more of, less of? Just a few basic questions to kind of just allow and remind each other that, hey, we're still on the same team. We're still doing this together. We're kind of connecting at the end of the day to just come together and check in and see what needs we each have.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You guys have done, I know it's been a process, but as a friend, both of yours, you've done it so well and have truly just been an example of considering the other person, even in the depths of your heartache, and I think that is very hard to do. And seeing it from their perspective and allowing space for their perspective and how they saw it, or what maybe they're processing one singular element of it.
Yeah.
And you're processing still the whole thing, or vice versa, or I just think that is a very admirable thing to do for someone, is to hold space for their grief while you're grieving.
Yeah.
And that's got to be growth too, because in all the stages you've been in, from personal blood loss of people that are your true blood to joint, the child that you created together. These are all such different perspectives.
Yeah. There's I think a generosity in it, like you said, of to know that there's another person's perspective in the grief. And especially for ambiguous loss like miscarriage, or if it is the loss of someone, with my brother, it was my blood related brother. And it wasn't Eric's, but he still lost him as a brother-in-law and as a friend and as all the ways, again, that Adam meant to him. It's not solely my loss or my mom's loss of, Adam being her son. Well, that was a huge one. Again, he was many things to many people. So the loss is collective. Absolutely. No one has the corner market on grief. And sometimes grief does something where there is a lot of centering in it, which we can't not be self-focused and self-involved when we're grieving, because it's such an affront and attack on what we know to be true and life as we know it. But there's always space, there's always room for others to take up space in that too. It's not just ours. And I think there doesn't have to be sometimes that felt sense that, where I know sometimes I've felt a sense of scarcity of, if I allow someone else, or I put their feelings above mine, or if I share space, somehow my needs won't be met, or it will feel less meaningful, or, I get that there's kind of different degrees of loss and grief and how removed or close you are to someone. But none of my grief or loss is going to be cheapened or stolen from by someone else choosing to remember my dad or my daughter or my brother.
Sure.
That only enhances and grows the honoring for that person.
Yeah. What's it been like going through major joys and highs in life post losing people that you've loved? What has it been like feeling that major joy coupled with that person's absence?
Yeah. You picked all the easy questions.
Had some time. 25, let's see.
Right.
A while.
I mean, gosh.
I mean, because as a friend, when you are, well, let's just go into it. When you're graduating high school, when you're going into college, when you're getting engaged, walking down the aisle, all of these beautiful, joyful moments in your life.
Yeah.
How do you allow yourself to feel the joy when I'm sure this shadow of, loss and it's still present?
Yeah. Mm. I think that last word you said of it's still present. I think to say that no feeling is final or no feeling gets, again, like the corner market on how you have to feel, knowing that even if we experience joy for 5% of the time in a year of loss, and the other 95% are all these less comfortable feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any good or bad feelings, but there's ones that are definitely harder to experience. That 5% of joy doesn't negate the other 95%. I think there's certainly this feeling of we're often met with guilt or met with some type of should in our head that invalidates feeling some happiness when we've experienced loss, because it seems so hard to re-experience without that person being a part of reality now. And the truth of it is that because we're such multifaceted and nuanced people with a lot of context, we're going to feel multiple things at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the more we can allow ourselves margin and allow for any feelings, even joy, especially joy,
Mm-hmm.
that's again kind of just more so creating and developing this wholehearted person or more healing in our life. And it's not, yeah, cheapening. It's not invalidating any of the loss that we've had. But it's just focusing on what do I feel presently, and can I honor that? Because that's the authentic emotion I feel.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to do us any good to try and make ourselves feel something else when we don't. Because who's to say that's the right thing to feel? There's no right path. So, like, your path is the right path.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right; it does make those times kind of tricky. And those big days, the anniversaries or holidays or big milestone moments in life. And that might be another time for marking of ritual of how do I want to usher this person into this really profound moment for me?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lot of times why we might give a name to our child, our daughter Rooney that we had last year, so 7 months ago.
Yeah.
We chose to use her middle name and use Sloan, our first daughter, because naming is a big piece for us. And we wanted her to always carry that with her. And we wanted to, again, remember and say her name often. And so that brings back a slew of feelings.
Yeah.
But it gives us a lot of joy to be able to have that be a part of her world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Rooney Sloan.
Rooney Sloan.
Yeah, she's so precious.
Thank
So my
you.
other question, piggybacking on that one, is for someone that has experienced a lot of loss, how do you go through life not anticipating, fearing loss? How do you stay optimistic? How do you not hold on to everything so tightly because you are fearful, because you've experienced the depths and you already know what that's like? And I guess, how do you live without fear? Can you live without fear?
I don't know that you can live without it. But I will say we're not saving ourselves from any pain by expecting the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
I think I've lived a lot of life in that space. And
In the space of
the
fearing, like
space of
deep
fearing.
fears.
Yeah. Yeah. If I'm totally honest with you, There's a long history of a lot of men in our family dying early.
Mm.
And so deep in my subconscious psyche, whatever you want to call it, I still have that fear of like that I'll lose my husband early.
Mm-hmm.
All the women in my family have. And so there is this weird expectancy, but I think I used to be part of this anxiety and depression group several years ago, and I remember something that our leader said, which was to speak to yourself more than you listen to yourself.
Mm.
And I think with that tendency to grow jaded and grow skeptical and cynical and even maybe nihilistic sometimes, we have to keep speaking truth to ourselves that, you know what, correlation isn't causation. Just because the women in my family have lost some incredible men doesn't make Eric any more prone
Mm.
to dying early.
Mm-hmm.
There's no logic to that, but my trauma is tied to that. And
Yeah.
so speaking to the trauma dust,
Trauma dust.
speaking to that
Yes.
and informing ourselves in our trauma, the kindest thing we can do with our bodies and how much our bodies hold trauma is when we notice ourselves kind of bracing or
Mm.
expecting the other shoe to drop or living in fear because of that
Mm.
trauma. I think the best thing we can do is thanking our body, thanking our brain, like, hey, you're trying to keep me safe. I get that. You're doing a darn good job.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I don't need to fear that.
Mm.
Like, I can let that go.
Mm.
And you've served me well. I have a good gut and intuition, but I can also recognize this for what it's not
Mm.
and speak back to it. But thank you. Thank you for being proactive and tending to me well. I'm going to need you again.
Mm. That's good. Wow. Okay. Woo! Oh, okay. So, where are the tissues? um, and where do we go from here?
Right?
There's just so much to talk about.
Mm,
Okay, so talking about the difficult days
yeah.
or anniversaries of losses or anniversary like birthdays, holidays. What are some ways that you and Eric have, celebrated or honored those days, honored those people in those moments?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it is again keeping in mind that we're going to grieve differently. So what I need and what Eric needs will probably be vastly different.
Mm-hmm.
We ran into that with Sloan, like memorializing our daughter. I realized that I needed, for me, there were two very clear things that I needed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on her birth date, where her birth date was supposed to be, which was the day after yours, which was
Mm-hmm.
always very special to me. And that for me was I wanted to make her a birthday cake because that would have been special to me as her mother, and I would have done that had she been living and experiencing her first birthday. And I wanted to decorate her room for Christmas. I was really excited about that. And so those were things that I did for remembering her, what would be her first birthday, or sorry, her actual date of coming into this earth.
Yeah.
um, and I needed to do that, whereas Eric needed to do different things. And it was okay that I didn't need to have him join me in those things because I didn't need to like force my shade of grief onto him because he had his own
Mm-hmm.
that was meaningful for him. I think, like I said earlier, of allowing all feelings and really just to allow yourself margin for those days of planning a couple things that you could do, but being willing to scrap the plan entirely. Um, to know that you aren't supposed to feel anything particular is a big piece.
Mm.
Of like not feeling guilty. Don't feel guilty for not feeling something that
Mm.
you thought you should have been feeling. Jovi last night was asking if Rooney was ticklish. And I said, she's not ticklish just yet. She doesn't really know what that is. Her body doesn't really know what that is yet. She will be ticklish someday. But it's kind of like this idea of like if you try to tickle yourself without the element of surprise, it doesn't actually tickle.
Yeah.
And so
That's a good point.
I'm tying this in some way to feeling of like, without that element of surprise, it's like it's not a genuine, honest feeling, and we don't actually have to feel it. And yeah, I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but it's some feelings just have to be felt spontaneously and in the moment. And so, um, yeah, the difficult days, knowing that they will be there, and just to give yourself space, extra time to move slowly, and to not expect something specific with how you should move through those times.
Yeah, that's good. Are there specific resources that you would recommend to others who are going through loss or who have someone that is grieving that have really helped you?
Yeah. There's some good, there's always great books out there. There's great tools, resources, things like that. So I'll give you a couple tangible things. One, not a book resource, but one thing that I did was always keeping something that was like fidget worthy, I guess, in my pocket, like in my coat pocket or in my purse. It could be an actual like fidget toy, or it could just be a crumpled up Kleenex, something that your hands can kind of get some energy out. Was a really helpful resource to have, just because your body is experiencing so much. So having something for often your hands to do can be helpful. I really liked a couple books. There was actually a book in your house I was reading this morning, which is some poetry, Rupi Kaur, The Sun and Her Flowers. Poetry was very healing for me during grief. There are some good books that I really like. There's one called Grief Day by Day that gives you kind of a palatable focus for your grief each day in a very doable, reasonable thought to consider in more bite-sized pieces. I liked Barbara Brown Taylor's How to Walk Through the Dark. Kind of the the beauty that darkness can give you. And I'm not trying to glamorize loss, but kind of making a case for hard times and what they teach you and the perspective that it brings and things like that. So those, and I think any grief groups, I think groups are really powerful from a collective perspective of again, you don't have to know someone well, but when you have a really similar loss, that's an instant tie and bind. And so that can be really powerful when you're trying to make sense of and walk through your loss.
And also when you lost your dad, that was your first, was that your first intro to like therapy?
It was,
was
yeah.
that like, obviously you're a therapist, and how does someone like go about finding the right therapist for them? You were so young, in that time, but probably not exactly knowing what you needed or what was right for you. But what are some good tips for finding the right therapist?
I hope one day there's like a universal database.
Like a quiz.
Yeah. Take this 10-second quiz to find your ideal therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's probably trial and error,
Yeah. A lot of it, yeah, unfortunately, is kind of word of mouth. But I think back to that, like, know thyself, like, know what you need and know what you don't need. And so knowing things like, okay, does the sex of a therapist matter to me? Of, for me, I probably do better with women. I specifically see women. Some people, for their own trauma, might want someone of the opposite sex. Knowing other practical pieces, like, do I want to use insurance? Do I want to do self-pay? Things like that. But then also, like, okay, what do I connect with the most? Like, who has the ability to help me open up and get in touch with my, like, truest, most authentic self? So, that could be someone who has really good experience in grief, or who, you know, uh, maybe for someone who they might integrate their faith if that's important to them. So, I wish it would just be like a Google search is how you could do it. But I think often right now, I'd say the best it's been is just kind of a word of mouth of asking your friends, surrounding people who are also constantly working on themselves and trying to be self-aware versions and heal current and past traumas. Ask them, see what resources they know about, and listen to those. It also might, for some people, therapy, as much as I, you know, am a fan, and it may be that you're not ready for therapy, or maybe therapy isn't the place that you want to get healing from. So it could be, talking to someone more of a mentor. It could be having a coach. It could be having another couple that's walked through something similarly. Could be meeting with your shaman. I mean, so many things where it doesn't have to look like a licensed clinician, even though that's my path. Everyone kind of needs their own different path with where they find healing.
What are some other, if you don't mind sharing, what are some other modalities that you used, whether it be a massage therapist or to help you process through the grief?
Yeah. Yeah, funny that you mentioned massage therapy. This wasn't a way that I was aware that was helping me access and work through my grief, but myofascial therapy um, has been very instrumental, due to how it helps you to access the different ways that you store trauma in your body, and helps free up and make you more pliable, just helps your body be more loose and be aware of where you store some really hard things. So that was kind of an unexpected way that I know that I need to help treat my body when I have, a flare up of a string of hard days. Um, Also, for me, I sought out some specific therapy that's trauma related for the loss, as a lot of my experience with loss was was met with trauma and having to work through that too. Not every bereavement will be laced with trauma, and some of it will. But so for me, getting from my own therapist, going to therapy, but also doing a specific trauma therapy that was called brain spotting was really big. And that adjacent in a way, or akin to EMDR, which is another trauma therapy, but using your somatic experience to try and navigate and deal with potentially repressed memory, and help dealing with it in a way that's different from normal talk therapy. By different ways of reprocessing the information, so that not so that you don't ever it's not as though it takes away memories of the trauma, but you don't you don't experience or relive the trauma in the same way where it's re-traumatizing you every time. It becomes less powerful and less poignant. And so it takes away a lot of the sting of the trauma dust, if you will.
And you would just find that there's like brain spotting specialists, or you just
All
like
right.
Google that or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say Googling that again, asking, if you know anyone in the mental health field, like, hey, do you know any trauma therapists?
Yeah.
Do you know any somatic therapists? Do you know anyone? Yeah. Massage is another great way of accessing and healing
Yeah,
a
I
lot
think
of
of
your
like
pain.
sometimes when you're like, for me, if I am holding in a lot of emotion, like it takes me doing yoga and then I'm just like releasing it all. Sometimes it's just
Yeah.
so stored up in my body that I need to
Yes.
physically move or do something.
Yeah.
Like open the hips is a huge one I know for females.
Yes.
But I love that you went outside of only just, the mental, it's like the physical aspect of how it affects your body.
Yeah.
I think is so important to address.
Yeah. We can't like compartmentalize this as just being a mental, emotional. I mean, it is a completely, a holistic. There's no part of your body, physical, psychological, mental, emotional, spiritual, that it doesn't touch.
Yeah.
And so, like, we have to do our due diligence and like meet it at all of those levels to find, I think, the most healing and like growing and changing that we can.
Yeah. Well, this is your space and time. So, is there anything else that you want to share about or address?
Yeah. I think the only thing that I wanted to touch on is something if you have just experienced loss and it's still very, very fresh. I work with a lot of clients where a recent crisis has happened or a recent loss. And something that I have found that has been really helpful for those like immediate days following an unthinkable tragedy or some type of loss, even if it was expected, is having a type of script for yourself. So I've explained it before to clients as I wish that we could all walk around through life with this like lanyard around our neck and like a few bullet points of like all the unseen things that we're carrying and what we're going through to, again, create awareness and empathy and just space for people. But also because like to inform others of like, hey, I may not have as much tact right now, or like my temper might be really short, or like this is what I'm going through. And we might have like 2 or 3 versions of a script. So, um, you know, we show up in our life interacting with different people. It could be the stranger barista at our local coffee shop, like a boat around the corner. And like
Drinking their matcha, by the way.
drinking their matcha. It's so good.
So good.
I'm now a matcha fan.
Converted.
But yes. But something might kind of remind you of your recent loss. And suddenly you're kind of trying to figure out how to explain to a stranger way maybe you lost your sense of reality for a second, or maybe you disassociated, or and so there are these different levels of script I say to develop. So one with like your close friends, one with strangers. It could be one in your workplace or one with, um, people at your place of worship, if that's something that you have in your life. These different scripts to kind of, it's not to accommodate people, but more so to help you make, to help kind of explain where you're at without having to share pieces, like to kind of boundary yourself in a way that feels like you're showing up authentically. And you're also saying, hey, like, here's my specific context in life right now. And you know what? I just lost a brother, and I'm a little emotionally all over the place right now, and I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I'm healing from it. And so it could just give us a bit more of when we experience those waves of grief, which we certainly will. Grief is such a sneaky and like stealthy SOB. Yeah. And so it's going to come up unexpectedly. And so I think scripts are a really helpful way to deal with the unexpected moments of saying, you know what? I know what that was.
Yeah.
And speaking to it in an appropriate context regarding, depending who your quote unquote audience is.
Yeah.
And so you don't owe anyone anything. You don't have to go into the depths of something. You can just speak one or two little bullet points to it. And so I say, develop your scripts, know your scripts, keep them as little notes on your phone or write them down so that you don't have to keep reliving, refiguring out how to explain this, but just go to those few statements to help you.
That's so great. And I think to your point, we kind of live in this culture where we're showing all the highlights, the highlight reels of our life and the positives and the ups. And when people actually ask you, how are you? Sometimes it feels not welcoming to be like, this is how I really am.
Yes.
And I think we need more of that authenticity.
Yeah.
And I know for me, like I welcome it in my life from the people that I spend time with. It's like I don't want your highlight reel. I want the true you. And that's such a way of, right, like not over explaining too much that you're not comfortable with, but also really answering someone so that you feel seen and known, and you're not just going through your days faking it, putting on a front. I think that's such great advice. And I think we're entering into a culture that really appreciates that and wants more of that and needs more of that.
I think so too.
It makes friendships richer. It makes community richer. And I think it can be really scary to share like your hurts and what you're really going through, but also very healing, just naming it, like you said.
Yeah. Vulnerability begets vulnerability.
Yeah.
You know, it's magnetizing. It helps draw us closer, it brings it out, it normalizes it. And so I'm hopeful too of this kind of new generation of normalizing mental health, and therapy is sexy again.
Yeah. All the things.
For the first time.
Like shows after shrinking all of them.
Right. Of like, yeah, what it's happening anyway. Like, why not speak it, and why not speak about it truthfully and be honest with ourselves?
It just makes conversation richer too. And speaking of vulnerability, you've been so vulnerable with us in this space today, and usually you're on the other end of it. Usually you're the question asker, the what do we say? Therapizer. You're the therapizer. So thank you for allowing me to sit in this chair and ask you the questions. You know, so much of this I know because I'm close with you, but also getting into the depths of it, and your processing through certain things has just been wonderful to sit here and just hear. And I'm so glad that you felt comfortable to share your story with the world. And
thank you.
It's just been a beautiful time with you, and also a very healing time with you. Like, as friends who have been through so much, just to actually sit down and talk about it.
Yeah. It's, I appreciate,
because it is so much a part of who you are.
It is. Yeah.
And it's worth sharing and talking about if you feel comfortable. And I'm just grateful you feel comfortable.
Thank you. I'm really grateful too, just for the opportunity. And yeah, I don't feel that our losses don't define who we are. Like, I'm not my losses. You know, they also like they show up as being part of me, and they've had an impact. And so they're certainly not like trophies I walk around with, but they're important pieces that without it, like I wouldn't be who I am. And so, you know, speaking those things into existence and giving them the credence that they deserve I think is honoring of ourselves and of those people and of those experiences. So,
Yes.
thank you.
Oh, well, it's been an honor, truly. And honestly, one of the easiest conversations I have because I just feel like we're sitting here
Mission
having
accomplished.
matcha, hanging out.
We are.
Where can others find you?
Yeah.
Whether it be social media or locally?
Yeah. So a couple different spaces. If you want to find me in the mental health realm, if you are a resident of Indiana, you can check out myrenewalcounseling.com. Or if you just want a space to kind of like read more about what counseling is, it doesn't mean that you need to be a seeker of services or resources. It could just be like, what is counseling, or what is the Enneagram usage in counseling, or yeah, so that space at myrenewalcounseling.com. You can also find me in more of the creative space with at Beaulah_vintage on Instagram, is where I do more of my vintage curation, and also sometimes share some little bits of mental health too on that platform. And then also, like, tangibly, you can find me in the space of Lux and Ivy. Again, if you're in the Indianapolis area and Broad Ripple specifically, you'll see my home goods there on the shelves of that store, as well as some other a lot of great um, local goods and sustainable local businesses of specifically females, which is awesome.
Yeah, all good things.
Yeah.
Creative and deeper things.
Yes.
Well, this has been a true pleasure. And
likewise,
I think we'll probably be hearing more from you in the future. We'll see a little bit more sit down with therapist Abby and dive into some other topics. So I love you and I'm so grateful.
I love you too. Thank you.
Yeah.